Hey everyone, welcome back again to another Flutter tutorial, and in this session we will discuss about how to store a JSON inside shared preferences. Hope you all might know what shared preferences is. So shared preference is nothing but local storage that can be used for storing small amount of data, and the data types which are supported for shared preferences is integer, bool, double, string and list of strings. So these are the 5 data types that can be stored in with the help of shared preferences, but in this series we will be going forward to store a JSON inside shared preferences. So without wasting time, let's directly jump into the coding part and let's see how it can be done in Flutter. First we need to add the dependency which is shared preferences. So let's go to the perspective and we can add this dependency which is shared preferences, and always check for the latest version. As for the video recording date, this is the latest version. And after adding this, let's go to the main.dat file. Now starting with the main.dat file, we have a navigation to my home page, and inside the my home page we have an empty scaffold. Let's first start creating the UI. Let me first create an app bar, and inside the body we need to have a button. Okay, and the button is an elevated button which when click should store some kind of data inside shared preferences, and the data is going to be the JSON data. Okay, and before writing the on press event, there are something which we need to discuss before that. First, let us start creating a model class that defines the structure in which we are going to store the data, and our model is going to be the homepage model. First, let me create a class, and we are going to have 2 data members. One is name, which is of type string, and next is the age, which is going to be the integer. Okay, and let us create a constructor for the same. And for creating a model class, you can just make use of the shortcut available in VS Code, that is generate data class. And once it is done, you can able to see the methods that is automatically created for us. With this you can move forward. After creating a model class, let's move on creating a hard-coded JSON which can be used for testing in this app. Okay, and for that let's move on to this folder which is raw, and we have a separate dart file which is raw underscore data. Here let me create a hard-coded JSON data which contains the same kind of attributes, that is the name and the age. And I'm going to create another JSON data which is the default data. Okay, so this default data is something which we will be storing or which we will be using in places where the data is not present locally inside shared preferences. Okay, basically this is the data which we will be playing around with, but in case where if it is not stored properly, then we'll be making use of this default data. Okay, now after defining the raw data, let's move on with creating methods for storing and retrieving the data from shared preferences. Okay, for that let's move on to this file which is homepage shared preferences dot file. First let's create a class which is going to be the homepage data, and let me create a method for saving the data as a JSON inside shared preferences, and the method is going to be save JSON data, and we are going to pass the data as a form of JSON data which we get as a parameter over here. First let's create a instance for the shared preferences, and after that we'll be making use of JSON encode and passing the data which we get as the parameter, which is the JSON data in this case, which is then stored over here in this variable which is save data. And now we'll be making use of set string of method and passing the save data, that is we'll be storing the save data inside the shared preferences as a string value. Okay, and the key is going to be the JSON data which you see over here. Okay, now let us create a method for getting the data from the shared preferences, and similarly just the same way you can create an instance first, and you can make use of the get string of method and pass in the key which is the JSON data in our case. And if the JSON data key is going to be null, that is if the value which we get from this key is going to be null, then we will be making use of the default data over here. Okay, and after it is done we can make use of the JSON decode method and pass in the temp variable. Okay, so temp is going to be an object, and we'll be making use of the JSON decode method and pass in the temp over here, and respectively the particular decoded value is then mapped over to the homepage model class. And in order to access the individual data, you can make use of the dot operator. Since the homepage model class data is going to be stored in this data variable, you can make use of the data.name and data.age to access the individual values. So these are the two methods which we'll be using in the later part of the onPress event to store and get the data from the shared preferences. Now let's move on to the elevated button onPress event. Now inside this onPress event, let's call the corresponding function which is save JSON data as well as get JSON data. Okay, and we can pass in the raw data as the parameter over to this save JSON data. Okay, so this save JSON data is going to store the data which we pass as the parameter. So likely the get JSON data is going to help us retrieve the data back from the shared preferences. Okay, now it's all set. Let's rerun the app once again to visualize the changes. Now let us try clicking the save data button to save the JSON data in shared preferences. Now when we try to save this data, some error occurs. The reason is that the data is not getting stored and are getting only the default data over here. The reason is that we are making use of the cascade operator, and which in the sense is not asynchronous. Therefore, the get JSON data is called even before the data is properly stored inside shared preferences. So let us remove this cascade operator and try to call the methods in the traditional way. So we have replaced the previous onPress event with the help of the await and async, and therefore we can be sure that get JSON data method is only called after the data is properly stored inside this method. Okay, now let's rerun the app and see what it does. Hope we should not get this error this time. Okay, let me click the save data button and it works flawless. And you can see here the data which we received is the raw data rather than the default data, which means that the data is stored exactly the same way which we have expected. And with the help of the dot operator, you can go over here, like inside the get JSON data method, we try to print the data inside the console with the help of the dot operator, which is data.name and data.age, and we are able to individually access the name and the age values by mapping them to the model classes. Okay, so this is how you can store the entire JSON as a string with the help of the JSON encode, and then retrieve the data back with the help of the JSON decode method and assign them to the corresponding model classes to access the individual values. Okay, so for now we try to store a hard-coded JSON data, and we are able to just store and retrieve the data. But in the next video, we'll just try to create a separate JSON data dynamically, and we will be trying to add new variables, which is the new parameters. During the runtime, we update that data as well, say the shared preferences. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so stay tuned till the next update. Hope you guys enjoy this video. If you do so, consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.